EVs have been the buzzword of the Indian automobile industry, but of late there's been a new one cropping up, and that is the multi-fuel architecture or the multi-fuel platform. And that is the topic of our podcast today, Deep Drive, powered by Kotak Mahindra Prime. I'm Sergius Barretto.
Hi, I'm Ketan Thakkar. Yes, Sergius, clearly that end goal of attaining 100% electrification, the dream rather of attaining it by 2030, 2035. Even in EU, there was that hard deadline of 2035. Clearly, all these regulators have had to face a reality check. Clearly, regulators wanting to dumb down technology on the consumer. Definitely, there are benefits of 100% EV, but clearly, it's not something that the consumer is ready for that matter, even infrastructure is ready for. And we've seen that in the numbers. Exactly. Just before we got in here, you were analyzing some numbers, Sergius.
Yeah.
You would want to reflect on them?
Yeah, in fact, Ketan, if you look here, for example, let's look at the market share, fuel-wise market share. 2024, petrol was 59.4%. It went to 53. So it dropped. Petrol dropped, which is the cleaner fuel. And you would think that, that shouldn't have been the case because, funnily enough, diesel gained market share.
Okay, SUVs.
Yeah, despite of course, the anti-diesel sentiment here in India we've had for a long time. Right, it gained slightly, but it gained by about 1%, so from 17 to about 18.
Right.
CNG, that was a big gainer. Suddenly, you've got CNG now making a revival, 17% to 21%. Electrics doubled, yes, but on a very small base.
Right.
2.5 to about 4.6. And hybrids kind of stayed, 2.3 to 2.6. But, honestly, Ketan, when I look at these numbers, okay, let's just start from the bottom, the hybrid. I think there's a lot of potential in hybrids because if you look at it, it's 2.6%, right, which is what EVs were last year.
Right.
And this is with a very small number of hybrids.
Models.
Yeah, exactly. Very few models. Last year there was only one hybrid launched and 18 EVs were launched last year.
Wow.
Right? So it just goes to show you that, if there were more hybrids, for sure, I think we would be doing more, what are your thoughts on the CNG rise, though?
I think it's got to do with the number of model options and the accessibility and affordability. At the end of the day, if you keep consumer at the core of what they choose, then the powertrain story of numbers clearly reflects. And it shows that, infrastructure is still a challenge with electrification. Infrastructure has improved dramatically with CNG. And that's the reason why you see not only the penetration moving up, but more and more models coming in from the vehicle makers. So clearly, at the end of the day, it's the consumer demand that determines the future, and that is what is compelling a lot of these vehicle makers to talk about the subject that you raised, multi-energy platform for the future. Right. And clearly the estimates and the forecast that everyone gave by the end of the decade doesn't appear that it will happen in a hurry. The two-wheeler market, which started on a very good note, we are still talking about 6 to 7% penetration. And with the GST, we started seeing the ICE momentum coming back. With more SUVs, the diesels are going to be sold in high numbers. Infrastructure is still a challenge. So clearly we have a much longer bridge to that North Star of having 100% electrification. And if you have to cater to the needs of the buyers in the meanwhile, you got to have vehicle architectures that suits the requirement or the demands of the market. And hence the buzzword has become that multi-pathway, multi-energy, flexible architecture. And we've started seeing everyone now moving in that direction. From the conversation started with born EV, grounds up EV architecture to now multiple powertrain architectures in the future.
Yeah, how it has turned. I remember, Ketan, you and I were talking about this some time ago. I think this is when we saw the first Mahindra BEV.
Right.
And we looked at it and we said, I think how soon before they'll put an ICE into this,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely.
Because you're absolutely right. Consumer demand is what will drive, adoption, and multi-platform architecture, and which is what we are going to be talking about today specifically, is kind of like the way to go. Now you can go let's say pathway, so you can have only EV models, you can have only ICE models, but I mean, there's benefits with kind of doing everything on the same architecture rather than having different architectures. And we've seen this with various brands. I mean, for example, BMW.
Yes.
They had ICE, of course, platforms. They launched the Neue class, which they said was an EV-only platform. And now, in fact, I think Hormuz had done the interview with one of the members of the board, where he said that, well, we're going to have a third platform, which is going to be a multi-fuel platform. But all our cars will always look similar, so there'll always be BMWs, tech inside, screens, that would look familiar. But, they're clearly now seeing that, okay, maybe Neue class EV only isn't necessarily going to cut it. You've got to also have a multi-fuel sort of platform. Same with Stellantis. Stellantis, when they announced STLA, the platform, it was announced as BEV. In fact, and I think just before we got in here, I was just checking the latest press releases and what are they referring it to as. They now call it BEV native.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it was meant to be, but now it's multi-platform, multi-fuel, right? So clearly, doing multi-fuel on the same platform, there are huge advantages. Obviously, for what we are just discussing, customer demand will change, but you also could argue then that you could just have different platforms. No, the point with having the same platform is then you get economies of scale.
Absolutely.
From the same platform.
It has to make business case.
Exactly. So it makes just so much sense having the same car, platform being able to sort of, go whichever way. And in any case, if you're multi-fuel ready, you're ready for, like you say, the North Star. Absolutely. So when it does get to EV, one platform doesn't become defunct.
Right.
It's multi-fuel. You just go scale back on these. So
absolutely. I mean, so Sergius, if you were to look at it, the entire purpose behind going for grounds up EV was to offer an electric vehicle that is highly efficient, delivers range, addressing the needs of the market at a better cost with battery prices falling. But at the end of the day, what is the purpose that we are trying to address? All regulators, be it in Europe or India or any other part of the world, the intention is to clean up the environment and look at the sources of fuel. Clearly, in India's case, there's a significant import bill that we have. And given the per capita and given the rate at which the infrastructure development can happen, it's going to be a long way before we actually see complete self-reliance when it comes to making our own EVs and bringing it out at a cost that an end consumer is willing to pay that price. So it's still some time away. Interestingly, I was at the India-Japan Mobility Summit in Bangalore this week, and I was looking at the presentations made, and the core of the discussion was multi-pathway, because clearly when you look at it from a well-to-wheel perspective, there are multiple data points. People have divergent views there, but the fact of the matter is that even at this juncture with EVs, from a well-to-wheel perspective, given the source of electricity that predominantly comes from coal in India, EVs are still from a CO2 standpoint, still negative. Yes, eventually we're going to cross the bridge and it is going to be hitting a place wherein EVs will start making more sense. And hence, given the fact that we don't have rare earth or capability of mining, or we don't have the capability to make cells in India, given the geopolitical situation that we have. It's really important from India's context to look at what different sources of fuels that we have, and can we make it available to Indian consumer at a price that he's willing to pay. At the same time, addressing the pollution problem, addressing the affordability problem, and addressing the fuel import bill problem. And hence, from India's context at least, the multi-pathway approach appears to be a lot more pragmatic approach. Hence, we started seeing Mahindra's, Tata's thinking about multiple pathways, and the Japanese, who are going the hybrid and a multi-pathway, have started talking about EV. So clearly there are going to be multiple powertrains in the future.
Exactly. Absolutely. In fact, and I think, we have to also clarify maybe what do we mean by multi-fuel or multi-energy platform. It doesn't mean one or two. There's no hard number defined to this. It's just basically if you have multiple powertrains options. So it could be internal combustion, which is your diesel, petrol. It can be electric. It can be hybrid. It could be a plug-in hybrid. It could be a gas, or even perhaps hydrogen fuel cells, if that does, sort of fructify. But so that's what we mean by multi-fuel platform. And in fact, Ketan, like you said, Mahindra and Tata, you mentioned, they're looking at it. And it's actually very interesting because if I look at these two brands, and let's maybe get into the brands, who's doing what.
Right, sure.
Which brands are doing which approach. Because very interestingly, you use the phrase multi-pathway, right?
Right.
That's quite literally what Toyota calls their strategy. It's called the multi-pathway product strategy.
Right.
Because they say that, they don't as yet at least have this multi-energy platform.
Right.
I mean, we know they've been very slow and shy of EVs maybe, so, they didn't go whole hog there. But I believe the new Corolla is going to be a multi-energy vehicle. And they've not publicly said what platform is or given the name to the platform. So we'll have to wait for that. But, just to come back to Mahindra and Tata Motors. I mean, if you look at Mahindra, last year they announced a multi-energy platform.
New IQ.
New IQ. Absolutely, right? And they said like this platform now will, be the future. They've got electric, of course. They've got petrol, diesel, hybrid. They didn't speak of gas, but I think that's more a brand DNA thing.
Right.
We know Mahindra doesn't want to do CNG because they feel it's not a brand fit. Theoretically, they could do it, but it's more coming from a brand fit, not a platform limitation.
Right.
I think that is very, very clear. It is genuinely a sort of multi-energy platform.
That's right.
And it's going to go plus 4 meters and sub 4 meters.
Absolutely.
And I think they had all the visions as such, the Vision X, which we know is like an X line of vehicles, Vision T, which was the Thar, Vision S, which is the Scorpio.
Right.
So you can very clearly see that this platform is indeed multi-energy, multi-body style. It's going to underpin everything, right? Tata, on the other hand,
different approach.
Yeah, different approach. They are going multi-energy, but not with the same platform.
Absolutely.
And they're using their ICE platforms to kind of, I would say,
convert
them
EVs.
into EVs, maybe now even into hybrids. And the conversions, in fact, initially what we saw were, stage 1 conversions, what they were calling stage 1 themselves.
Right.
Stage 1 conversions were kind of quick conversions. You use the existing spaces and fit in batteries, packaged motor, etc. Stage 2 was a halfway point where, you said, okay, maybe I'll just modify the floor a bit here and there. And stage 3 is, the whole hog. So
EVs.
Yeah, absolutely, EVs. So I think now where they are at, and we've seen that with, for example, let's take the Punch maybe, or even the Harrier.
Yeah.
The Harrier is a good example because it's an existing vehicle which was born as an ICE only. They've converted it to electric, but they've not gone and just plonked in the motor in the front.
Yeah.
The main motor is at the rear.
Right.
They've redone the entire floor, the entire bit, to have the main motor at the rear. The suspension architecture has had to change.
They call it the Born EV, don't
so they call it a Born EV, right? They call it a Born EV because they've just changed everything, right? I mean, the Nexon, if you see earlier, what they did was it was a front-wheel drive in the engine bay, the space you have. Harrier, they could have done that, but no, they didn't. They said, no, nothing doing. It's going to be, like completely clean sheet of paper below the top hat.
Better efficiency of battery packaging.
Exactly, better battery packaging efficiency. The rear, the main motor is on the rear, which is generally what you want to have in an EV.
Right.
Because safety, all the high voltage cabling is behind generally. The main driving wheels are on the rear. So that instant torque is not overwhelming the steering wheels,
Right.
Otherwise your front wheels get too much of load.
Right.
Steering and acceleration. So plus you get a frunk because the bigger motors at the back.
Right.
So there are many advantages, and I think Tata are kind of doing this kind of an approach, where going multi-fuel, but perhaps with
different
architectures. But Ketan, do you see, and since you have a lot of we would say brought in a lot of scoops right to Autocar. Do you see them doing something like a multi-fuel platform like the new IQ?
So how I see it, Sergius, is that, they've been very clear that they want to go full hog when it comes to EVs. And it's always a very delicate subject to discuss hybrid with Tata Motors because they claim that they are moving in the direction that the Indian government has laid out for them is to move towards complete electrification. But clearly the penetration that they were anticipating is not happening. Few years back, they claimed that they want to do 50% EV penetration by the end of the decade. That number got changed to 30% by the end of of the decade. We're talking about they've remained in that range of 13 to 15% for a while. The overall passenger vehicle penetration, despite having so many models, has remained in the range of 4 to 5%. So there's one clear indication there, Sergius, and which is what we've seen very strongly in China. You use the Born EV architecture and you plonk in a smaller engine and make it a range extender.
Right.
So that is potentially one of the alternatives that Tata Motors could look at in the future. While Mahindra did announce their new IQ architecture, they were not very explicit about hybrid.
Right.
But clearly they also knew at the back of their mind, if the market were to move in that direction, and which is where the Japanese and the Koreans were veering towards eventually, they also had to have an alternative. And there is hybrid being worked on the 7XO, which could potentially make its way into the Indian market by 2027. And they also want to do a hybrid on the coupe, which is the ICE version with a hybrid powertrain.
So now, the 9E.
Yes, 9E. In a ICE avatar with a hybrid powertrain. And again, for our audience, there are different kinds of hybrids, right? I mean, there's a range extender wherein you have bigger battery, smaller engine. You have strong hybrid wherein you have a smaller battery, bigger engine. And then you have plug-in hybrid wherein you have a much bigger battery and even sizable engine, the twin sources that powers the vehicle. So clearly, I mean, we spoke about in a previous podcast, JSW Motor is talking about plug-in hybrid, MG Motor is talking about plug-in hybrid, Maruti Suzuki is likely to do a range extender, and there is strong hybrid being delivered by Maruti and Toyota. So help our viewers understand as to how do these individual hybrids make sense?
So, well, a strong hybrid, let's say a non-plug-in, strong hybrid, it has the advantage of not requiring a electrical socket.
Charging station.
A charging station. So basically you have an engine on board which is large enough to drive the car solely on engine power, so it can handle all of that, that's required. But what it does is it very often gets into genset mode and charges the battery, and then that you have an electric motor that's also strong enough to drive the car forward on electric power only.
Right.
So
it takes away the anxiety of having a charging infra.
Exactly. That's what it does.
That's
and it
what
gives you,
we have with High Rider and High Cross at this junction.
Absolutely, the Toyota system. Plug-in is a sort of variant on that, you could say, where you now say, hey, let's increase the battery size, and plug it from the wall. So you're getting maybe a longer EV only range.
So we have a bigger battery. And a range of about 90 to 100 kilometers.
Absolutely.
Depending on the size of the
depending on the size of the vehicle and exactly. So that's what your plug-in is essentially. But of course the drawback here is now you have to have a socket
a charging point.
A charging point. A range extender actually is very different from these two. These two are kind of similar, but a range extender, basically your engine is a genset. Right. It is only charging the battery which is powering the electric motor. So like you said earlier, you can use a small engine now because the engine is not taking the direct load and doing 100% of the work. Right. It's not doing all the driving. So all it's got to do is run in a sort of a very efficient state. So it's sipping fuel, and charging the battery, and then, the electric motor is doing that. And it's I think, like you said, yes, Maruti are working on that. I believe Renault, the new platform that they just announced, RGMP Small, has that capability too. So I don't know if you know whether that's the plan for it or not, but the platform has the capability.
Absolutely. Yeah, Sergius, you're right. I mean, again, Renault's gone the multi-energy platform way, and something that the management shared with us. We both of us were there at the technical
at the
technical session.
Presentation,
session. Of course, they did not tell us about the smaller one, but we understand that eventually they want to offer all powertrains in the future, and this is essentially de-risking themselves from whichever way the market moves, and have one architecture instead of wanting to do multiple architectures, which is where you consolidate all the investment and react to the market situation and offer the powertrain that the consumer wants at a price that the consumer is willing to pay.
Ketan, Renault, it's a good example actually, the RGMP. If we look at the platform, initially I was a little confused when I saw, and I realized a lot of the hard points and things like that. I mean, a platform is essentially defined today. Earlier it was, the chassis and you had the top hat. But it's today a platform is a loose definition. It's basically the hard points around the car in terms of suspension hard points, engine mounting. Can you do a transverse and a longitudinal, or is there a limitation to that? So these kind of things, and Also, then there is the distance between the firewall to the steering. So those things, if they are fixed, is what you'd say is the same platform. Now, what these guys have done, Renault, very interestingly, like you said, multi-fuel platform. But this is a platform they had earlier, the CMFB.
Right.
Right. And I saw the thing, and I was like, I remember
how different
asking,
is it?
Yeah, I said, how is this different?
Yeah.
Right? Isn't this the CMFB platform? And they're like, yes and no. So the bones are the CMFB.
Right.
If you were to imagine the human body, the bones are the CMFB with some alterations, maybe small alterations, but the entire re-gutting has happened to the central nervous system, if we could call our, the brain and all of that. It's a completely new E&E architecture.
Right.
And we know a lot of brands struggle with this.
Right.
Just to change the E&E architecture, they end up changing certain hardware also.
Right.
Hard points in the car.
Right.
But Renault have re-gutted the entire CMFB with the new E&E architecture that they call, in fact, I have it down here. It's called Software, Electric and Electronic Technology, or SUITE.
Sweet.
Yeah, so SUITE 400 is the version, the latest version that we have here in India. It's co-developed with Google.
Yeah.
Right. So it's got a completely new E&E architecture which interfaces with hardware too. So for example, right now we do have Google on board on a car where you sign in on your touchscreen. You have it on yours as well on your car. You sign in maybe, and your infotainment is basically now Google run. With this system, it's taking charge of the entire dashboard and other areas of the car. So if you sign in with your Google ID, it will set up the seat position, driver modes, sport, this, whatever you like.
Fantastic.
So it's got control over more of the car now.
So this is, in essence, gadget on wheels.
In a way, it's a sort of, I would say, not electrifying. I mean, maybe making the car more sort of in tune with your online avatar or something.
Absolutely.
So that's what one difference is with the RGMP, right? So they said, look, it's a new E&E architecture. It's not what CMFB had. CMFB couldn't do all of this. Right. It had a touchscreen that had Android Auto.
Right.
That's it.
Right.
This one, the SUITE 400, takes control of the entire car. But then they've also done some sort of hardware changes to the bones, just minor bits,
changes.
To sort of package for sub 4 meter. This was never a requirement for them. Right now, I think the smallest car they had on that platform was the Clio, which was just above 4 meters, 4.0 something. Now you could do what, say, Mahindra did with the XUV 400. The Tivoli was shortened, just cut the boot. But I was talking to Vikraman, Dr. Vikraman, they are head of engineering now. And he said,
Renault.
At Renault. And he said, look, we don't want to do a sort of truncated approach.
Yeah.
We'd rather have, better balanced vehicles, style-wise and packaging-wise.
Yeah.
So therefore, we've changed a few hard points in the platform, so we can comfortably do sub 4 meter.
Right.
And the same for electrification. They could do a sort of plug and play kind of electrification. He said, but that's not really the point. We don't want to use the existing spaces and things like that. So we've done a few modifications again so that we can do comfortable EV. So therefore, they say this is now called a new platform, RGMP small. Right. I assume there's an RGMP medium and big to follow.
Right.
Right. But so I think if you were to look at multi-energy, this one is quite interesting because you've got, and they've spoken of ICE, so internal combustion. They've spoken of hybrid. And like I said, I think we know they're probably also doing range extender in there. They've also spoken of gas. They say we can package CNG absolutely perfectly. There's not going to be any compromises. There's a big tank in there. So they've readied for that. They've also got drivetrain flexibility, driveline flexibility. So you've got front wheel drive, rear wheel drive, 4x4 possible with a propeller shaft or with an e-axle as well.
Wow.
So they're sort of
truly flexible architecture.
Truly flexible architecture is what they say they're ready for.
Being a non-engineer, Sergius, I've tried to understand, and simplistically what I've understood with time is that there are 3 layers to a vehicle architecture. Trying to make it easy for our viewers to understand. There's a mechanical architecture, which is the base on which the vehicle is made.
Right.
Then there is electrical and electronic architecture, given the fact that there's so much of compute and connectivity on board, and with so many many chipsets coming on board. You got to have the computer chips to be able, and the wiring harnesses to be able to deliver that responsive system that we have it on our phone. So that's the second layer. And then the third layer is your OT and the software part of it. And what we are seeing now is vehicle makers really playing with these three dimensions and trying to deliver a solution that not only caters to the space requirement, the powertrain requirement, the cost requirement, but also the investment requirement that they are in. Because at the end of the day, given the variety of products, body styles, and the frequency with which the new models are getting launched, it's just impossible for a vehicle maker to have different architectures all the time. So I think the need of the time is to have flexibility, and which is what we are seeing. Literally every car maker is trying to bring into their vehicle architectures, and in a way, this transformation that we are seeing is definitely going to help an Indian consumer, because with the flexibility, all these vehicle makers will be able to deliver newer cars, different options in terms of body style, in terms of powertrain at a much faster speed than we've ever seen in the past, isn't
it? Absolutely. In fact, Ketan, the body style, like you said, also I would like to just go back to Mahindra New IQ. When they did talk about it, it is truly a flexible platform. They didn't speak of, like I mentioned, gas CNG because of the brand kind of positioning.
Yeah.
They also didn't speak of sedans and hatchbacks because, again, of the brand positioning.
Right.
They could technically
They are a pure SUV player.
Yeah, they want to be a pure SUV player, so they could do that, but they didn't speak about it. So it's not to say that, again, there's a limitation. It's not limited. The new IQ can, in fact, architecturally, they're ready. And Ketan, just to go back to what you were saying, like in terms of platform, to sort of define a platform. I like what you said. You're very right. There's like the body, the monocoque these days, or because we're talking passenger cars, it's generally monocoques, not ladder frames. And then you have, like you said, the E&E architecture and the software. I would add maybe like the engine to it as a separate component. Outside, because you do have that carrying forward very often.
Yes.
Sometimes the architecture can change, E&E can change, everything else can change, but an engine,
the heart is very critical.
Yeah, it's a significant investment to make engines today. And we've seen brands carry, engines, powertrain forward across generations when the platform changes. True. So yeah, you're absolutely correctly said. Three. I would add the fourth one. Engine is
the fourth
also
important
another
layer, which is what we're talking, multi-energy.
Multi-energy. Yeah. True.
Absolutely, Sergius. So Sergius, with EV penetration really not galloping along in the rest of the world, the big question is, what about huge amount of investment that you've made on born EV architectures, right?
Right.
And one of the thought process at Mahindra has been, can you plonk a small engine in a BEV platform? So on the InGlow platform, there have been multiple studies whether on the 9E can they put in a smaller engine and come out with a range extender vehicle. Range extender, or REV, as they are called in China, are a rage, and they actually get a similar tax benefit in China as they get for EVs. And that is a category, as part of a suite of hybrids that we've discussed, becoming a strong alternative, wherein, like you mentioned, that the engine becomes like a generator for the BEV. So clearly, it's very hard to predict where the market is going to move, but REVs are becoming a in thing of late, Sergius. So while they're doing that, Sergius, why do you think they're doing that from a technical standpoint?
Yeah, so you're right, Ketan. From a commercial point, it makes sense. You've got this so much of investment gone into BEV platform. They're not selling as much. Let's try and do this into ICE. But yeah, from a technical point, why are they looking at REV? It's an easier step. It's a halfway point, I would say, because look, if you're going to say, let's make it a full ICE platform, right? You're going to need that bigger engine, okay, to package there. Depending if it's front wheel drive, rear wheel drive, all wheel drive, you're going to have propeller shafts everywhere, right? In this kind of platform. So rather, what you would do is, I'll make it an sort of ICE vehicle. I put in an engine, smaller engine, run it as a genset, right? In that space in the front. In fact, Renault have a platform called the RGEV, which is an example of this. So what they're doing is they're taking an EV platform, right? Which is why the Renault Global EV platform, but they are hybridizing it with the range extender. So the battery pack, which is a large battery pack between the wheelbase, they're kind of halving it in that space, putting a fuel tank and the exhaust systems that you need, engine up front. Right, and it's charging that battery there. Which is now still significantly large, right? Because you've only half the thing. So you don't have to re-engineer now for a propeller shaft running to the rear or propeller shafts to the front wheels. You don't need the larger engine. So it's really an easier engineering job.
Much better way of packaging it, because one of the reasons why Maruti Suzuki's range extender vehicle got delayed was the challenge of packaging the smaller battery, smaller engine, and delivering the optimum fuel efficiency. Probably they were trying to do it out of an ICE architecture. So packaging a smaller battery and a smaller engine in a compact vehicle must have been a nightmare. So this is a interesting way, or rather the more practical way.
It's a more practical way of getting
an alternative.
Yeah, it's a more practical, cheaper way, and something that you can do more quickly in that. Therefore, of taking your BEV platform and getting it ICE-ified as such, right? So just don't bother with doing a full ICE kind of setup.
It's quite nightmarish from an engineer standpoint. I mean, they have to come out with so many different alternatives depending on what the market needs are, and each engineering change calls for, months of testing, validation, man hours. The cost involved is quite significant. So I mean, it's heady time to kind of try to do so many different alternatives. But at the end of the day, vehicle makers have to deliver what the consumer is willing to pay the price for. I'm at the cost of repeating myself, and which is exactly where we are seeing the penetration levels being a challenge. And it's still a crystal ball gazing. And every single time we do reach out to vehicle makers, trying to understand as to how are they thinking about future. We keep hearing of different numbers, but of course, with the rider, at the end of the day, it all depends on how things will change in the external environment. I mean, right now, the geopolitical situation that we have, Sergius, with fears of not being able to get oil, gas, it's quite crazy, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And hence, it's important to be flexible and deliver a solution based on what is possible for one to deliver.
So I think, Ketan, we've been discussing for a long time, all these new multi-energy platforms. What about brands like Hyundai, Suzuki? Who else are going to be doing this or not doing it? Because at least from Hyundai, we've not seen any big announcements. They do have pathways, right? EGMP, which is electric only. But are they going to be looking at these kind of platforms? Fully flexible?
So Sergius, just like Tata's, probably they will have the EV-only architecture and the hybrid architecture, I would say that. The new generation Creta, we've spoken about that in the past, the SX3i as we call it, that's the internal code name, that is going to have ICE as well as hybrid. And I'm also potentially hearing of a diesel continuing way beyond Cafe 3. So Hyundai is recommitting itself to a multiple platforms. That's one of the way that Tata is addressing the future. Maruti Suzuki is going to probably go a similar way, a hybrid platform and an EV platform like they've done with e-Vitara, and then they have the architecture. Toyota, like you said, is a multi-pathway. So the D900 platform, as they call it internally, is going to have a plug-in hybrid, is going to have a pure EV, and it is also going to have ICE. So yes, it is an incremental investment, but there are multiple paths being taken. So one thing is certain, Sergius, that at the end of the day, everyone's got to work on multiple different powertrain platforms, because committing yourself to one powertrain is going to make you less competitive, and which is where Renault has plunged into EV, hybrid, CNG, ICE game. And clearly, because it is not a secret that ICE is going to go on for another 10, 15, 20 years minimum. And it will be electrified with time. And how? Various forms. Mild hybrid, strong hybrid, plug-in hybrid, range extender. So clearly we have a long road or a long bridge before we actually start seeing a path towards complete electrification.
Right. So I guess there is no really right way that everyone has to adopt, right? I mean, like you said, each brand will do their own thing. Tata, Hyundai may probably have multiple platforms, EV platform, hybrid platform, ICE platform. Renault, Mahindra are saying, hey, let's have one platform that can spawn everything else.
So the interesting part, Sergius, sorry to butt you in. The interesting part here is that each of these platforms will have multiple body styles. So that is a way for them to commonize various things and make sense from a business standpoint.
So Ketan, before we end, I think we can agree, and what we've concluded is that the future, whether you go through a energy architecture or a multi-energy pathway with different platforms. It's basically to hit this requirement of having a multi-fuel future.
Yes.
And we spoke of at the start of this podcast, the fuel mix.
Yeah.
Right, Ketan? If you could maybe crystal gaze into the future, where do you see this mix? I mean, right now, just to jog your memory, petrol's at 53%.
That's right.
Diesel's at 18%, CNG 21%, electric is 4%, and hybrids are about 2 or 3%. Where do you see this, let's say, going ahead? And I think that's a nice way where we can wrap up.
Well, we clearly rely on the external agencies to get an understanding. Like I told you, I was at that India-Japan Mobility Summit that happened in Bangalore, and I was very curious to see what does Nomura has. What are they guiding for? What are they forecasting? As per their estimates, Sergius, now we are talking 2035. As per Nomura, EV share is going to rise to 36%. Okay. Hybrids are going to be about 15%, interestingly. CNG at 18%, and petrol plus diesel is going to be about 31%. So this indicates that 60% of vehicle could still use some form of combustion engine, that is hybrid, CNG, ethanol blends, even in 2035. So yes, ICE will not disappear quickly, and electrification will coexist with alternate fuels. How long, how soon, the CBG part, the hydrogen part, when that will evolve, we will see. But at least in the existing form, the CNG is going to have a sizable share. EV is going to be 35%. Clearly, it shows that everyone's moving in that direction. So EV share is going to go up with the battery prices falling. And there's going to be a time in 2030 wherein all powertrains are going to be sort of competing each other on the cost front.
Ketan, before we end, we also have to discuss what happens to EV-only manufacturers in a multi-fuel future. As we are saying, it is the multi-fuel future. What happens to brands like Tesla, Rivian, VinFast even, who actually, I think, if my memory serves me right, started out with internal combustion. I think they had hybrids as well, but have committed to full EV now. What happens to brands like these?
Yeah, so it's going to be really challenging for these EV-only companies, because on one hand, they are facing tremendous competition from the legacy players who are coming out with barrage of electric vehicles. And on top of that, if you're going to have alternatives in form of hybrids, internal combustion engine continues for a longer period of time, so definitely it is going to get difficult. We know that automotive industry is all about scale, and they'll definitely face challenge on scale, intense competition, and now intense competition from the alternate fuel side as well. So I don't know. I mean, just like how we've seen in the two-wheeler space, probably you'll see on the four-wheeler front as well. There's a consolidation that takes place. Eventually, companies will have to join hands, maybe shut shop if life gets too difficult, or put in tremendous amount of capital to stay relevant in the marketplace. So yeah, it's going to get more and more difficult. Talking about Tesla, instead of expanding the portfolio, I'm understanding now that they're going to be rationalizing the portfolio. Though the largest selling brand in the world is a Tesla right now, but they're facing tremendous competition from the others. And similar maybe the story with the others. Expanding portfolio is probably the only way that they can stay relevant. And the future demands a lot more investment, and who knows, probably they adopt a way like how BYD did. BYD has started offering hybrid as an alternative along with the significant EV push that they have. So it's definitely going to be a lot more challenging. Excuse me, it's definitely going to be a lot more challenging, and the time will call for a lot more investment and a lot more resilience to face the competition, be it on the EV front or also from the hybrid front.
Thanks for that, Ketan, and thanks to you guys out there for watching and tuning in to the podcast. We hope you've enjoyed this one, and if you do, please, of course, let us know in the comments. And remember, we go live every Saturday, 11 a.m. So hit the bell icon to be notified every time we post a new video. And if you prefer to listen to this podcast, you can do so on Apple and Spotify. So thanks again. See you again next week.